It's been helpful to me to realize that whatever terms we use are going to be inadequate, and whatever terms we use are also going to have a history. So I think a lot of Christians, I've heard a lot this week, a lot of you use the language of same-sex attraction. And a lot of Christians, I think, believe that that's a kind of neutral term. And at least in the States, even that term has a lot of baggage. A lot of people will hear that term, and it triggers some painful experiences they've had where, their parents forced them into a reorientation therapy that was actually not what they needed at the time. It was disappointing to them. It created false hopes. So I think before we decide what language we're going to use in our preaching and in our teaching, just recognizing that it all has a history and it all has baggage, and maybe being willing to name it. So if you go with the gay and lesbian vocabulary, which is the kind of current vocabulary in the States and probably here as well, just being able to name the complexities of that. For instance, I use the word gay for myself, but I'm immediately aware that conjures up all kinds of images for people. It conjures up images for you perhaps of the Mardi Gras that just happened. And so being willing to say, look, I know I just said these words and I know it has these connotations, but now I'm going to talk about how I'm using it and why. And maybe if you opt to go for the same-sex attraction vocabulary, just say, look, I know that as soon as I use that phrase, some of you are going to be hurt because it sounds like I'm promoting, a certain Freudian understanding of where homosexuality comes from and how it can be cured, how it can be changed. So just sort of acknowledging that exists. I think there's something, and I know this is controversial, but I'll just say it. I think there's something to be said for when you're going to be addressing a controversial topic, and maybe when you're doing it for the first time, erring on the side of using the language that the world is going to be comfortable with, and then taking the opportunity as a Christian to qualify it, rather than the other way around of saying, I'm going to start from what I think is the best Christian way to speak and sort of expect the gay and lesbian people to get on board. Kind of showing hospitality by, in a sense, using their language, but then inviting them into a deeper understanding. So what I will often do is I'll identify as gay, but then I'll begin to talk about celibacy, and I'll begin to talk about sanctification, and I'll begin to talk about how God doesn't allow the indulgence of all of our desires. And so what I'm doing there is I'm using the vocabulary that I think people are often comfortable with, but then I'm trying to give it a Christian interpretation and a Christian appropriation. So I hope that helps. Yeah, thank you. Maybe the first thing to say is I don't think all of your Christian friendships need to become what Aelred is describing as spiritual friendship. That can sometimes be that can actually, in the first place, you don't have enough hours in the week for that, right? You can't become that kind of friend to everybody you're acquainted with, even in the church. And so the first thing to say is maybe just it's really okay if you have a certain set of friends that you only see a couple of months, every couple of months, and you guys get together and watch a soccer match or something, and you enjoy one another's company for an evening. That's okay. We need those kind of friendships in the church. We need those kind of acquaintanceships in the church. But I think also recognizing, and it'll often be, at least in my experience, organic. It'll be something where you find yourself suddenly, wow, I'm actually spending 3 nights a week with that person. When did that happen? This happened to me when I moved to England. My friend Jono and I, we just started meeting for coffee once a week, then it turned into 3 times a week, and then I ended up having dinner with he and his wife, a couple times a week with some other friends, and it was just this organic thing, and eventually he called me, and he said, Wes, we would love it if you would be godfather to our daughter. So it was just this sort of natural progression, and when I got that phone call, that was in a sense kind of naming something that we knew to be true already. Similar with Aiden and Melanie and I, we just kind of liked each other a lot and started spending more time together. And then that prayer of blessing that we invited, it was more, I take it was more sort of acknowledging this is the kind of friendship we have. We just want to kind of name it as such. So I guess I would just say avoid Avoid the guilt that comes with saying, man, I've got to do this with every same-sex attracted person I know in the church. Maybe not. I mean, maybe God's calling you to do it with one, and maybe it'll be organic. It won't be sort of, do you want to become part of our family? And they're like, whoa, I've only been over here once before. I'm not saying you're doing that. I'm not saying you're doing that. But yeah, that's what I would say about that. My understanding, and you're getting a single person's perspective, so bear that in mind. My understanding of Christian marriage is that it's meant to be a porous relationship in the sense that it's about hospitality. So I think you see this even in the way that when the two spouses become married, almost always in a Christian marriage, children are the result. So even just the visual symbolism of having children says this is not a relationship that's just about two people sort of gazing into one another's eyes. It's about two people kind of being opened up beyond themselves to love others. And you see that in children, but you see it in the way marriages can often be. I mean, this is one of the reasons I talk about the way that we have an idolatry of the nuclear family, but I also want to be careful and say I really like the nuclear family because I have experienced profound hospitality from families. I think I lived in Minnesota for 3 years, and there was this married couple. They had teenage children at the time, and they invited several of us who were single over to their house every Sunday for lunch. It was just an open invitation. If we were in town, we were expected to go to Dan and Liz's house for lunch on Sundays. And it was very much, they were obviously just deeply in love with each other, and they loved their family. They were a very close-knit family. But I almost think it was that closeness itself that made that home an attractive place for me to go as a single person. So I don't think we have to think of this as competitive. I think the more Dan and Liz loved each other, the more they were able to kind of open their home to me as a single person. Now, let me just add to that. I think there are certain marriages where the idea of a single person moving in and sharing a home, that's not going to work, and that's okay. I don't think every Christian marriage has to feel that way. I mentioned my friend Jono. I hope this will be recorded, so I hope he won't mind me saying this. But he said, Wes, we love you, but Megan and I would never want you living in our house. And Aiden and Mel feel differently. So I think that's okay. I think there are certain relationships where it's going to be, for the health of your marriage, it's going to be better for you guys to have your own space, but then you can love other people out of that. And I don't know if that answers the question, but that's sort of how I think about it. One more. Yeah. I think like a lot of people, it started with pretty agonized prayer. Lord, please take this away. I spent a lot of my teenage years praying that I would get rid of my same-sex attractions. I went for healing prayer, which I don't know if you have that language here in Australia, but in the U.S., people will talk about a certain form of, I suppose it is sort of charismatic prayer in which you invite God into painful moments of your past, and you invite healing in those places, and it's a kind of listening for the Holy Spirit form of prayer. So I sought that out. I have been in counseling where I mentioned the one counselor, but I've been in counseling where counselors are trying to discern whether there were childhood reasons that might have contributed to my same-sex attraction, so seeking to work on those things. So it's those kind of things. It's the normal kind of things, psychological places and spiritual places that people tend to go to try to shift. Some of you may have heard of the Stanton Jones and Mark Yarhouse study. They did a longitudinal study of I think it was about 70 people that were involved in Exodus International, which is the ex-gay ministry that just kind of shut down in the U.S. But they found that those who reported that they had been, more same-sex attracted and then over time became less same-sex attracted. I think that their findings, I need to go back and look exactly, but I think that their findings were that happened in sort of group ministry. There wasn't any one therapeutic thing that happened, or there wasn't any one form of spiritual engagement that happened. It was belonging to an Exodus ministry and seeking counseling and prayer in the midst of that. That was the experience of those who reported these shifts. And Mark Yarhouse is a friend of mine. I see that his book is on the table. It's a really good book. I would recommend it. But Mark Yarhouse would say that their research did not turn up any formula that explained all the people who shifted on that continuum. So I'm not sure if that answers the question, but that's what I'll say about that.